Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenour, and it's going to be a fantastic episode today. Hope everyone had a good week at work and has really been gearing up for the holidays that are rapidly approaching. I always know the holidays are around the corner when I start seeing Christmas commercials on TV starting in the beginning of November, which I think personally is a little too early because we haven't even gotten to Thanksgiving yet at that point. But again, regardless, it's a great time of year with the holidays and really trying to spend time with family. But again, as we know, that's going to look very, very different this year. But what also is very exciting about the change in season and the holidays approaching is all of the baseball off-season news that's been going on and that continues to go on further into the wintertime. There's been a lot of things going on, a lot of new developments, a lot of new announcements with winners of the Manager of the Year awards, winners of the Rookie of the Year awards, and everything in between. So a lot of things to discuss today. I'll get right into it, and I want to first get into some recent news going around the league, a lot of different things that have been going on in the baseball world recently. So I'll be sure to touch on all of that's been going on, give everybody a little update about the MLB world. Afterwards, I want to rank the best managers in baseball right now and really highlight some of the best minds in baseball. As we know, the Manager of the Year awards were just announced, and we'll definitely be hearing about those two winners in a little bit in segment number 2. And as we move out of that second segment, I'll highlight every team's perfect free agent signing that MLB.com selected and mention whether I agree or disagree with those selections and if the free agents that they are deciding to place on those teams could actually be good fits for those said teams. And be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I will get into a fun segment where I will give my personal stadium reviews and grade the different stadiums that I've been to and mention what I liked and disliked about some of those ballparks. It's going to be a great show today. Really excited that everybody is here to join it. But I want to jump into some news, some really recent news that's been going on. And there's been a lot of things going around the MLB early on in this offseason, with the award winners being announced, potential trades and free agent signings, and really everything else in between. But I want to first jump into the recent news about Francisco Lindor and what the Cleveland Indians shortstop might be doing next season, because there has been a lot of latest developments about him and what's going to happen with him moving forward, whether he'll be with the Indians or not. And Lindor has actually been a consistent hitter in his career with the Indians. He's had a very, very good career in Cleveland, batting above 300 in each of his first 2 years with the Indians, and then batting 270 or higher in every single season he's played in, except this past year where he hit 258. So a career low in batting average this past season for Lindor. Not a great sign to go into this offseason, especially with all of the rumors that are going around. He's been at the center of a lot of trade rumors with the Indians front office, really vocalizing that they want to try to save some money, really cut back on expenses and not spending so much money on certain players, mainly because of the tight financial restrictions that they're going to face this year with the COVID-19 pandemic. And trading Lindor would likely cut down on their payroll significantly, but it's going to be a very interesting kind of scenario in Cleveland and what they could possibly get in return for Lindor, and also where he might wind up. A team that has been very, very, very prominent in the news in regards to whether or not Lindor will actually go to this team. Not quite sure, but there's been a lot of rumors floating around with Lindor and this team, and it's the New York Mets. A lot of people feel that the New York Mets could make some sort of move to trying to trade for Lindor, who, again, I think he would be a very nice piece for their team. I think that he would add a great dimension. I know that they do have Ahmed Rosario over at shortstop already. So could we see possibly Rosario being pushed over to third base? Maybe Lindor's the one that gets put at third base. Lindor does have a good arm. He is a capable fielder, and he can clearly throw across the diamond on a line. So moving him over from shortstop over to the third base position might not be that bad of an idea. They've got a lot of young talent besides Ahmed Rosario. They've also got Dominic Smith. They've got some great pitching on the way already with Jacob deGrom. I mean, he's been incredible his entire time with the Mets. And I think that if they go after somebody like, Lindor, and they really try to go after him and trade for him, they could potentially bring on somebody else like JT Realmuto, who a lot of people feel could also wind up with the Mets. So the New York Mets are making some serious moves, and I think that they could, this isn't the last that we will hear of this baseball team, because they're going to definitely keep their name in the news in the next couple weeks. I honestly really would not be shocked if Lindor was dealt well before opening day. I've actually seen a lot of things that people believe that in the front office, they're trying to get him out of Cleveland before the first game of the 2021 season. So between now and then, we've got, 6 or so months to figure out where Lindor might wind up. And if he does get traded, I think that it could potentially set him up for, a big signing if he has a good year in 2021 in his free agency year, which is 2021. So after next year, he will be up for free agency, and he's going to be part of a ginormous class of shortstops with Javier Baez, Trevor Story, just a couple guys to name, that he's going to also be competing with potential, spots on teams and really trying to get some serious contract money. And so if Lindor is able to potentially wind up in a trade this year, and he has a really good year for whatever team it might be, not only will it set him apart from other guys in this very heavy shortstop class that we will start to see in 2021, but it could also potentially set him up for a long-term deal with whatever team he's with. So he wouldn't even have to worry about, where am I going to land? Am I going to get on a good team? Am I going to get the money that I deserve? If he's able to play well next year, and if he is able to get traded from the Indians to wherever he lands, it could definitely set him up well for the future. So I think the Mets would be a prime target for him. I think that, really, there's a lot of teams that could totally use, a solid shortstop on their team. I'm thinking about some just random teams that are popping in my head right now. Perfect example, the Cincinnati Reds. I think that they would benefit greatly. Now, I don't know who they would trade with and what pieces they would be willing to give up. Another team that could maybe benefit from this, the Milwaukee Brewers. They come to mind because Orlando Arcia, he's all right over at shortstop, but I think having Lindor there is clearly better. A former All-Star, somebody that has got a great bat, a great glove, and I don't think that many teams would want to shy away from a player like Lindor. So I think he's definitely going to be a highly sought-after person in this offseason if there is a trade to be made. But again, don't be shocked if he's dealt sooner rather than later. And not to mention, the Indians don't want to have to pay the money that they're going to owe him next year, which is $21 million. Now, he was paid, I believe, $17 million this past year, so they would have to pay $4 more million to Lindor next year. And with the pandemic and all the financial restrictions and kind of cutbacks that teams are starting to see right now, that's probably not going to wind up very well for either party. So it's probably best that Lindor is traded to not only a team that he could potentially continue to thrive on and even succeed with, but also so the Indians don't have to pay any extra money for any players that, especially when they're trying to cut back on their expenses. So that's just a little bit of free agency news that's been going on. And then also want to get into the recent awards that have been also handed out. We'll hear about the Manager of the Year award winners in a little bit. I don't want to spoil that quite yet, but I do want to talk about the Rookie of the Years because there was two very deserving rookies that did win the awards, and quite frankly, I was not shocked by either one of them winning this. They were actually my favorites, in my personal opinion, to win the Rookie of the Years in their respective division or respective leagues. Kyle Lewis winning it in the AL with the Seattle Mariners, the very talented outfielder that the Mariners have, and then Devin Williams, the winner of the NL Rookie of the Year. He also won the NL Reliever of the Year. Great relief guy out of the bullpen for the Milwaukee Brewers. Had an unbelievable year. He only gave up, I believe, one earned run. He had a 0.33 ERA, struck out 53 batters in 27 innings. Think about that. Again, I've made that point many times, but again, that is a statistic that I don't think I'll ever fully wrap my head around. Is that in one season, and again, it was a short season, it was on a smaller sample size, but still, if you're striking out two or more guys on average per appearance, or I should say per inning that you're pitching, and you're a relief pitcher, good luck to whoever you're facing because they're not going to get a single hit off of you. And it was actually a very interesting year for Devin Williams because he's really had a unique journey to the MLB. I mean, he was a 2013 draft pick that really struggled from the jump. I mean, he really seemed to have a hard time moving his way into the big leagues and really trying to get kind of, breaking through and getting his first taste of being an MLB player. Now, another thing that's interesting about Devin Williams is that he's actually the first non-closer since the Reds' Scott Williamson in 1999 to win the NL Rookie of the Year award as a pitcher. So a very mainly as a relief pitcher. So a very historic win for him. I mean, being a non-closer pitcher to win the Rookie of the Year in relief. And then he's also been the first relief pitcher to take home the honor since the Braves' Craig Kimbrell won it in 2011. So a very important win for him. Somebody that has, again, really, fought his way through the rankings of the minor leagues and has really, battled his way, and he's deserved it. And it was really great to see. In 2018, he had a 5.82 ERA. He walked 22 batters in 34 innings during his stint with the advanced Class A Carolina team for the Brewers. So, I mean, he really, not too long ago, was struggling, and he was really trying to find his footing in the professional baseball world. And then in 2019, that's when things started to get a little bit better for him. He started to get a lot of confidence in his pitches and on the mound, and he wound up getting an invite to the All-Star Futures game. So a guy that has, in the last 2 years, really seen a rapid development, and now over with Kyle Lewis, very similar, except his rapid development is not as drastic, I would say, or I should say, over a longer period of time. I mean, Kyle Lewis was drafted not too long ago. Devin Williams was drafted back in 2013. So, a lot longer time for Williams to really fight his way out of the minor leagues. But Kyle Lewis, I mean, a lot of things really have stood out from him. He actually went from Double-A right to the big leagues. So a huge jump. Not even playing Triple-A baseball, going right to the MLB out of the Double-A rankings. Something that you don't really see a whole lot. And I did see something this year that we had an abnormal amount of players in the minor leagues coming up from single to Double-A, levels and making their MLB debut. And it was very interesting to see that many guys are being really brought up when, it's something that it's not very characteristic of a lot of teams to do. Usually you're waiting until they're, at least in Double-A, then Triple-A, but having them in Single-A and Class A, I mean, especially in Advanced A, you don't really see guys just making that huge jump, but there was a large influx of guys this year that did go through that. But this has been the best draft pick for the Mariners in many years, and he put up unbelievable numbers. He batted .262 on the year. He had a .364 on-base percentage, a .437 slugging percentage, and he had an .801 OPS. He was actually one of only 2 players on the Mariners to have an 800 or higher OPS. Not to mention, he was first out of all rookies in batting average this past season, and he was also second in home runs and RBIs to Luis Robert, a fellow Rookie of the Year candidate. Kyle Lewis had 11 home runs with 28 RBIs. So something that, again, a lot of people aren't really realizing. Yeah, he's got a great glove and he's a great fielder, but he's got a lot of pop in his bat. And if you've got an outfielder that is young, that is starting to really, pick up steam and start to improve and get better, and he's, got a great bat and a great glove, there's not really a whole lot else that you really need in that situation, right? You've got everything that you need. So I think that moving forward, I think this Mariners team is going to be very good, and they're going to definitely really try to build around Lewis. And same thing over with Milwaukee. I think if they can try and build their bullpen around Devin Williams in a sense, especially if Josh Hader is gone after this year or whenever that might be. I know he's always being, thrown, his name's always thrown out in different trade rumors and whatnot. But I think there are 2 players that you could definitely build around in their respective kind of sectors in baseball, with pitching for Devin Williams and then obviously hitting for Kyle Lewis. I think that we'll see definitely a turning of the leaf, at least in Seattle, when Lewis continues to develop and continues to get better. And if they draft well in the next couple years, and if they start to build up some talent internally, and I know that they've got one of the best farm systems in all of baseball. Pretty sure it's a top 5 farm system, if not a top 2 farm system. So they clearly have the pieces, and they're developing players in that system for many, many years. Now with the Brewers, they're always a team that are trying to find that little window, that little time that they can go and go far into the playoffs or go and win a World Series. It's always that little window that they're trying to fit their way in through. And I think that Devin Williams, he really answers a lot of their questions, and a lot of their problems is with the pitching, because the pitching has been up and down the last few years. So having him as a constant coming out of their bullpen, whether or not Josh Hader is there anymore, they've got other guys that are good pieces. They can move him over to being their closer, because he's clearly shown in his, this past year, he could put up closer numbers. And that's what, he kind of did. I mean, he put up probably better than a lot of closers' numbers were this past season. So that's a great sign moving forward, really, for both teams. And so congratulations to both Kyle Lewis and Devin Williams for winning the Rookie of the Year in their respective leagues. Great seasons nonetheless, and again, very bright futures moving forward. So I want to now kind of move out of talking about the awards and trade rumors and kind of get back into the free agency stuff, because there's been a team that has really kind of started to pick up steam in this free agent market, if you will, and that's the Blue Jays. I mean, a lot of people believe they can make some serious moves. I know we've mentioned Lindor potentially, being a trade piece for a lot of teams, and his name's actually been thrown out as a potential, option to be traded over to the Blue Jays. Now, again, very similar to kind of the Mets, what do you do with an already established shortstop? Now you've got Bo Bichette over at short. You could move him to third. You could move Lindor to third. But then what do you do after that? Because you do have Travis Shaw over at third. So how are you going to kind of play around with Shaw? Now, Travis Shaw did not have a great year this year. Only batted .239. He had a .717 OPS. He only had a 95 OPS plus. So clearly not the 2017 Travis Shaw that we all know. If you do go after Lindor, you can easily move either Bichette over to third or Lindor over to third, either or, and you've got two established bats in your lineup and two solid fielders. I mean, Bichette's definitely not the fielder that I think people want him to be yet. He's young. He's still working on it. He's still trying to work out the kinks, if you will. But he's gotten a lot better in the last 2 years. So he's definitely saw an improvement in his fielding. I know he battled some injuries this past year, so clearly probably not the season that he wanted nor expected. But I think that they've got a lot of things moving in the right direction for the Blue Jays, that is. Now, whether or not they go after Lindor, that's a totally different story. But they're also open to a lot of other potential free agents. And a lot of people, there are a lot of rumors going around that they potentially want to go after either George Springer or Jackie Bradley Jr., especially since they've got an outfield that was great hitting-wise. I mean, Teoscar Hernandez, Randall Grichuk, and Lourdes Gurriel, all three of them combined for 39 homers and an 862 OPS. So the hitting in the outfield is clearly there. They need the defense, though. I mean, all three players were in the negatives in outs above average, but George Springer and Jackie Bradley Jr. were all in the positives on that stat. So, again, looking at it in kind of a strategic building your team way, you definitely want to maybe get rid of either... I mean, but that's the hard thing, because you definitely don't want to get rid of Teoscar Hernandez, because you're going to have to, if you're the Blue Jays, I don't know how much payroll they've got right now and what their kind of financial situation looks like, but if you've got, already guys like Teoscar Hernandez who have been playing very, very well, and then you've got Randall Grichuk. Grichuk had a great year, too. I mean, he only batted .273, but he had a .793 OPS, and he had a 114 OPS plus, and he also had 35 RBIs, which was good for first on the Blue Jays out of their starting lineup. So your leading RBI guy, Teoscar Hernandez, is your leading home run guy, and then Lourdes Gurriel. He picked up where everybody else left off. Those are your three leaders in home runs and in RBIs, all three of them. Gurriel had 33 RBIs, Grichuk had 35, and Hernandez had 34. While Gurriel had 11 homers, Grichuk had 12, and like I mentioned, Hernandez had 16. So they have the hitting in the outfield. If they go after a guy like George Springer, maybe they get rid of Gurriel. Maybe they use Gurriel as some trade bait. Maybe they use him as kind of a trading piece somewhere else. Who knows? They could bundle, Grichuk, or maybe they could bring, Gurriel and, say, Travis Shaw and send them over to Cleveland for Lindor. And then they could potentially, again, make room in that outfield to either sign a George Springer or a Jackie Bradley Jr. Now, George Springer is going to bring a heavier bat than Jackie Bradley Jr. will, but they'll both bring great defense. And I've seen a lot of things with George Springer maybe being an option for the Boston Red Sox. especially with Jackie Bradley Jr. not there anymore, or assumingly he's not going to be there, that could also open some things up over in Boston, and that could be very interesting to see in their outfield. So the AL East is going to possibly see a lot of moving pieces this year, and I know that the Blue Jays definitely need to go after some pitching. I mean, they did have Hyun-Jin Ryu, who was as of right now, he's an AL Cy Young candidate, and he was incredible this year. I mean, he had a 2.69 ERA. In 67 innings, he struck out 72 batters, and he had 164 ERA plus. So clearly, and again, I mean, that was one of the best. That was the best ERA plus out of the three pitchers on their starting five rotation that started, came in at least double-figure games. So, and not just Ryu. Ryu was very good, but Tawan Walker, another guy that came in, he had 6 starts on the year. Not really a main starter. Usually comes in as a relief guy. He will make starting appearances as he started in 6 games. He had a 1.37 ERA and he had a 3.25 ERA plus. So some staggering numbers for Tawan Walker. Came over from the Seattle Mariners during the trade deadline, and he was an immediate impact for them right when he got there. So with Ryu and Walker, and again, if they can keep Walker, I'm pretty sure he's a free agent this year, if I'm not mistaken. So if he walks, they did re-sign Robbie Ray for, I believe it was a 1-year deal worth $8 million. So they've got Robbie Ray coming back. He had an okay year. I mean, his ERA was above 7 before he came to Toronto in that trade with the Diamondbacks. But then once he arrived in Toronto, he kind of settled down a little bit. He had a 4.79 ERA from that point on. So, definitely improved, but I mean, how much of an improvement is that if you can't even get under 4 as a starting pitcher? So my main thing with the Blue Jays is if they're going to go after some trading and they're going to really try and, maybe, levy their position a little bit and kind of, jockey for position and getting Lindor, I think that they should definitely use one of the 3 guys they have in the outfield. I would not trade Teoscar Hernandez. I would probably try and trade either Gurriel or Grichuk, and then maybe package in an infielder, just so the Indians can get some sort of infield back in return, whether it's a Travis Shaw. Now, I would probably not get rid of Bo Bichette just because of how good he is. I mean, he batted .301 this year, and again, he only played in 29 games, so saw minimal action compared to the other guys on the starting lineup. But you don't want to get rid of somebody that is a budding superstar. So if you, again, Gurriel and Shaw for Lindor, maybe you throw in a draft pick or 2 or another prospect or something, I think that would be a fair trade. And now you've got an opening in the outfield. You can move things around, and you can kind of improve, that defense out in the outfield that is clearly struggling. And if you bring in somebody like Jackie Bradley Jr. or George Springer, they're going to fill that void, not to mention Springer brings a great bat. So he would easily replace Gurriel, if not, surpass what Gurriel would really offer as a member of this team and as an outfielder for the Blue Jays. So regardless of what happens, I think that there's a lot of interesting things that could definitely play out in this offseason. Not to mention, with all the other free agents that have had their names thrown around. I know we've been very vocal and have really talked a lot about Trevor Bauer. JT Realmuto's another name. I'm trying to think of some other guys that are on the free agent market right now. Mark Melancon, he's another guy that's on the free agency market. Ryan Braun just recently also making his way to the market. So a lot of guys are going to be moving around. We're going to see some new faces in some new places, and I'm really excited to see kind of what teams like the Blue Jays are going to do. And again, they've got a lot of different options. They've already made a few moves with signing Robbie Ray, so we'll see what they do moving forward. And then the other question is, will Lindor get dealt, not necessarily before opening day, but is he going to be dealt before February? And I think that's probably a more realistic question is, I think without a question, he's going to be dealt before opening day. There's no question about it. I think the Indians are honestly itching to get rid of him just so they can free up some, payroll and some of their salary for next year. And they don't want to pay him that $21 million they'll owe him. So the real question is, will he be dealt sooner rather than later? Is he going to be traded come February time, or is it going to be a little bit before that? I don't know. But I think that regardless, wherever he lands, he's going to have an immediate impact. But teams are definitely going to have to give up a lot, for Lindor because he's an established player. And like I mentioned, the Blue Jays, they can play around with some things. They've got a great outfield. They can use one of those outfielders as a piece to trade. and then bring in somebody like Lindor. You package in, like I said, an infielder just so there's some sort of even compensation, and all of a sudden you've got an opening to go and sign a very good outfielder, and then you've also brought in a great hitting shortstop. So a lot of things that can benefit the Blue Jays this offseason if they play their cards right. But again, some really interesting news going around, whether it's with the Rookie of the Year award winners and, like I said, trade rumors, free agency, all the sorts. I'm going to keep you all informed on all this news moving forward. So always stay tuned for any sort of MLB news that's going to be coming out these next couple weeks, because I just have this really strong feeling that something groundbreaking is going to be announced in the next week or two. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, I'm very excited to share that with all of you when that news does come out. So that'll do it for us in this first segment, but stay right there, folks, because after the commercial, I'll get into ranking the best managers in baseball right now. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenour with you all, and in our first segment, I got into the recent news that's been happening in the baseball world and what all has been going on in the MLB offseason so far this year. Be sure to stick right here with me for the final few minutes of the show as I'll give my stadium reviews of the stadiums that I have been to, so be sure to stick around a while for that awesome last segment today. I want to now dive into a little ranking of the best managers in baseball right now and who the top-tier baseball minds are right now at the helm. So I only did the top 6. I didn't want to get into a top 10, so I just gave the top 6 managers, in my opinion, this year in baseball and really just in general right now. So coming in at number 6, J.C. Tingler for the San Diego Padres. I have to give Tingler a lot of credit on this because he was instrumental in helping turn around the Padres this year and really giving them their best season since 2006. They did not make the playoffs for 14 years before they finally made it to the wild card series this year under the guidance of Tingler. And not to mention, they had one of the best offenses in all of baseball, as they were tied for 18th at the end of the year in team batting average, 4th in the league in homers, and 3rd in RBIs. So some incredible hitting numbers to put up with Tingler at the helm. He has never played at the professional level, so he has no prior pro baseball experience, as he only made it to the AAA level, and he was previously an assistant GM for the Texas Rangers. So he's really seen some major experience in high-up places in the baseball world that aren't necessarily player-related, but he's never had the experience as a manager, on the MLB level. This is his first MLB, manager gig that he's had in his entire career. And not to mention, this is his first year. He was an NL manager finalist for this season. And so that should really speak volume to what he did for this team, guiding the Padres to a second-place finish in the NL West and taking them to their first playoff series win as well since 1998. So a ton of new heights for the first-year manager, and again, being up for that award unfortunately did not go in his favor, but nonetheless, that should not wipe away the year he had because he was phenomenal in San Diego for the Padres as their manager. And it's going to be really exciting, looking forward to down the road and kind of what the future will hold for the Padres. Again, they've got a lot of young, talented players on this team, and having a young, talented manager is going to only add to that in the long run. So coming in at number 5, I had to go with Kevin Cash from the Tampa Bay Rays. And the recently named AL Manager of the Year, so congratulations to Cash. He had an incredible run so far as the Rays. As the Rays manager. He's continued that incredible run, and he's been absolutely sensational since he was hired in 2014. And every year since his hire, the Rays have improved their record each season. And it's led to them making it all the way to the World Series this year, and they were only 2 wins shy of winning it all. with one of, if not the lowest payrolls in baseball, Cash was really able to strategically piece this team together, and he did a sensational job of that. I mean, he helped guide them to a 40-20 record, which was good for first in the AL, and I mean, it spoke really volume as to how, well this team has developed under his leadership, and each and every single year you can go and look at their statistics, and as a team, their wins and losses, except for, I believe it was in 2014 to 2015, there was a little bit of a digression, but then from 2015 on, it's been nothing but an uphill ascension for this team, and they've really shown why they're one of the better teams in the AL. Cash and the Rays, they went toe-to-toe with some of the best teams in baseball this past season, and they really held their own against some of the most feared lineups as they were able to assert their dominance over the Yankees in the ALDS this year, and then narrowly escaping a full comeback by the Astros. It really speaks to the talent level the Rays have, and not only that, but also the managerial skills of Cash. Now, Kevin Cash was criticized during the World Series for how he handled the changing of pitchers in key moments of the season. I was actually one of those people that were a little skeptical of his decision-making, but the simple fact that he's guided the Rays to 3 straight 500-plus win seasons, and there's been 2 90-plus win seasons under his reign as well. I mean, not to mention 4 of the last 5 years compiling 80 or more wins. So that should tell you right there the impact that he's had on this, for the most part, pretty new, pretty young franchise. I mean, it's an expansion franchise. They came around in the very late 90s. So a team that has not been around really all that long, I mean, just a little over 20 years, and he's been vital in how successful this team has been recently, and again, with a top-notch farm system and some very talented pieces that I think that they could really build with Araz Arena. I mean, they've got Willy Adames, they've got Kevin Kiermaier, who's been great in center field for them, Brandon Lowe. They've got a lot of pieces that they could really use down the road. I think it's only the beginning for Cash and the Rays, and he was clearly deserving of this award of AL Manager of the Year with how well he's been able to really build this team. So congratulations to him, and he came in at number 5 on my list. Now, getting into number 4, the NL Manager of the Year, Don Mattingly. I mean, I think he's really turned the Marlins around, very similar to Cash with the Rays. Mattingly took this team to really heights that they haven't seen in over 15 years this past season. This was the first playoff appearance since 2003 for the Marlins, and Mattingly has been huge. I mean, huge in helping build this team up and really performing at an impressive level this year, even with the COVID-19 outbreak that occurred with this team earlier on in the season. And I think that is what is so impressive to me. I mean, he handled that as best as he could as a manager, I felt. He was able to really maneuver through that difficulty, and they wound up winning their first playoff series since 2003. And this was very interesting because I remember a lot of people, because prior to this, the Marlins were 2 for 2 when they won their first playoff series in terms of going all the way to the World Series and winning. The 2 years that they had won the World Series and the 2 years that they had been to the playoffs, they had gone on to win the World Series. So something that was very, very unique about the Marlins. This year, not the same result, but still a lot of people were, making those kind of comments and making remarks about that, saying, hey, watch out for the Marlins. It could, it's looking similar to how 2003 and I believe 1997 were when they win the wild card series or wild card game back then, and then they go on to win the World Series. But again, that was not the result in this season. Now, this is the 4th time that Mattingly has taken his team that he's managed to the playoffs, with taking the Dodgers, a team that the old team that he managed also, to the playoffs in 3 straight years during the 2013 to 2015 seasons, and all 3 years were 90-plus win seasons. And this year was so special not only because of the playoff run, but also the fact that he turned this team around from a 105-loss team a year ago and having the worst winning percentage as a team under the leadership of Mattingly that he's been, the manager of, to now making the playoffs, winning the wild card series over the Chicago Cubs, who are not too far removed from winning a World Series a few years ago, and now being honored with the NL Manager of the Year. So really has culminated in a huge amount of success the last few years for Mattingly. He's been clearly trying to build this team up, and trust me, there's been a lot of years where the Marlins were pretty much the laughingstock of the NL East, and he's pretty much, I think, is slowly turning them around and is kind of erasing that stigma that they have as kind of the laughingstock of baseball. And with this past season and how they beat a very formidable and legit team in the Cubs, it should show how well this, Mattingly has been in trying to build this team and really build up their talent and really try and, mold this team into what they are now. And the former all-star player that has taken his knowledge and experience in baseball to now being a world-class manager, I mean, I think that the Marlins are going to be just fine in a few years. They've got a lot of young players, and they've got a lot of young talent, and not to mention, they've got one of the best managers in the game. So, I mean, what more can you ask for, right? So now getting into my top three, and coming in at number 3, the Oakland Athletics manager, Bob Melvin, and another manager that has really turned around a franchise, but also, like Cash, using very little payroll to build and guide a team and ultimately overperforming with the cast he has, in my opinion. Melvin has done an unbelievable job with the Athletics, taking the team to 6 playoff appearances in the last 9 years and taking the A's to 3 straight playoffs on 2 separate occasions. Now, the success he's had in the playoffs hasn't been great, as they've yet to make it out of the ALDS under his leadership, and they've fallen in the wild card game in 2 of the last 3 years. But again, this should not be a highlight in terms of the lack of playoff success, because he was instrumental in changing this franchise and really turning them around. Melvin has helped Oakland to 490-plus win seasons, and he also helped the A's increase their win total by almost 50 wins from 2011 to 2012, where they went 47-52 in 2011 to going 94-68 in 2012. So talk about an improvement. I mean, that's pretty impressive. That's an abnormally high jump from one year to the next. In terms of, win total, that is something you don't see very often. A team improving its win total by over, just about 50 wins. Very, very seldom do you see that. And prior to Melvin's arrival, the A's had only gone to 3 playoffs from 2003 to 2010, and they missed the playoffs 13 times from 1993 to 2010. So Melvin, I think, has really overperformed for the A's, and he's taken them to a new level, to the point where they are a very well-respected team in the league, and they've shown they can win without a major superstar. Sure, they've got Matt Chapman, they've got Matt Olson, they've got Marcus Semien, but they aren't the Fernando Tatises or the Nolan Arenados. They aren't that top-tier superstar, but they're still good. Yet Melvin has them, again, being talked about as one of the better teams in the MLB and one of the best in the AL. The 3-time Manager of the Year has won it twice with the A's, once in 2012 and once in 2018, and also one time while the manager of the Diamondbacks. So he took the A's to their highest winning season in both 2018 and 2019, with 97 wins in each season, and this was the highest total since 2002, when they won 103 games. So Melvin has clearly solidified himself as one of the best managers in the game, and he's really shown, again, like Cash, that he can maneuver around with a very small payroll and still go after players that are going to be great pieces for the team. Now, coming in at number 2, I've got to give it to him. I think he's got a great personality in baseball, and he's a big-time player manager, I think, and a lot of people respect him, Joe Maddon. I mean, Joe Maddon has been successful really wherever he's gone. He took the Rays to their first ever World Series in 2008. He guided the Cubs to the World Series in 2016, where they won and snapped their 108-year streak of not winning a World Series. And now he's with the Angels. And although, this was his first year and they didn't finish great under his guidance, as they finished only 4th in the AL West with a 433 winning percentage, they have a lot of pieces they can build with. And not to mention a huge payroll to play with in the offseason to potentially bring in some serious free agents. Now, here's something interesting about Maddon. Since 2008, he's only missed the playoffs a total of 5 times in those 12 years. And from 2008 to 2018, so a 10-year span, he only missed the playoffs 3 times. So a pretty incredible run he's had as a manager over the last few years, and he's been a 3-time Manager of the Year award winner like Bob Melvin, and he's amassed over 1,200 wins in his managerial career, and he's been able to turn a lot of teams around that he's been on. And it's, again, the example is, as always, I like to bring this up, prior to Maddon arriving in Tampa Bay, the Rays had never been to a playoff, ever. They had never, ever, ever gone further than the last game in September. But once he arrived, he took them to 4 postseasons, and it, brings them to their first ever winning season as a franchise and first ever World Series appearance. Not to mention, he did that in the first year that he arrived in Tampa Bay. And when he arrived in Chicago, he took them to their first playoff appearance in 6 years. He took them to their first World Series since 1945, and he helped them win their first World Series since 1908, and helped them come back from being down 3-0 in the World Series. So, if the list must go on, it has to, fine, so be it, because that's something pretty incredible incredible accomplishments that Madden has checked off without question. I mean, he's really a top-tier manager, and there's no arguing about it, in my opinion. I think that he is by far one of the best managers in baseball today, and he's really been one of the best managers in the last 10 years, I would say, too. Now, coming in at number 1, I've got to give him a lot of credit because he's been Manager of the Year, World Series champion. He's really done it all. Terry Francona. Now, how could we forget about Francona? I mean, by far, in my opinion, the best manager in baseball. He's seen so much as a manager, and he's been incredibly successful as well with over, 1,600 managerial wins and being named the Manager of the Year 2 times and a 2-time World Series champion. He's done similar things that Madden has done, only with different teams. Like Madden, Francona helped the Red Sox to their first World Series win in over 80 years, breaking that Bambino curse that plagued them for years, and then followed up that 2004 performance with another World Series win in 2007. He was the manager for the Red Sox during that miraculous playoff run they experienced when they came back from being down 3-0 in the ALCS against the Yankees and prevailed to win in 7 games to go on and win the World Series and snap that, again, that haunting curse that they, were surrounded by for 80-plus years with the curse of the Bambino. He then leaves Boston and made his way to Cleveland, where he really continued and continues to see massive amounts of success. And since joining the Indians, he has taken them to 5 playoff appearances in the 8 years he's been there. Similar in Boston, he took the Red Sox to 5 playoff appearances in the 8 years he was there as well. So he has a similar effect Madden has, that wherever he goes, he winds up being instrumental in just turning the organization around as a team and taking them to new heights that they hadn't really seen in many years before that. Now Francona would have won his 3rd World Series in 2016 if the Indians had not squandered the lead they had over the Cubs in the series, but nonetheless, he took Cleveland to their first World Series since 1997, and out of the Indians' 855 wins over the 2010s decade, Francona has been the manager of 607 of those wins. So a good 71% of their wins in the 2010s were with Francona, which clearly shows how good of a manager he's been and really continues to be even today. And I got to say, I think that, I know that the Indians are talking about keeping their payroll low this year and trying to minimize on extra costs, but I think at the end of the day, no matter what, you're going to have a steal with having Francona as your manager, because I think he can play around with any sort of lineup. And I think that's what's so great about him is his versatility as a manager. I mean, there's been teams where he's, not had necessarily huge superstars. I mean, sure, he's been very fortunate to have guys like David Ortiz on his team or Manny Ramirez or, guys like Francisco Lindor, whatever it might be. He's been able to be around these very, very, talented players, to say the least. And I'm really excited to see where he's going to take this team in the near future and kind of where they're going to wind up, because they've got a really tough division ahead of them with the AL Central on how, heavy the talent is there. So whatever happens in 2021, I think it's going to be very exciting. I know the payroll cut is going to definitely affect some things, but I think no matter what, Francona is going to do everything he can to have a very successful season in Cleveland. So those are my 6 top, managers in the MLB right now. I know there's other guys that are very deserving of this also, but I would say those are the 6 that really stand out to me and that have really, done, I think, a very, very important and a very impressive job with the teams that they are with. So that will close things out here for us in our second segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the break, I'm going to mention the teams MLB.com picked out that could pick up their perfect free agent and who might that free agent be on that said team. It's been a lot of fun so far, but we've got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We will be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again, and in the last segment, I went right into ranking my top managers in baseball today and the impact they've had on the teams they are on and really at the helm for now. I want to now head into our third segment today discussing the recent article that came out on MLB.com where they picked each team's perfect free agent pickup. And I want to run through some of these selections they've made and mention which ones I like and which ones I don't like. Now, there are a lot of teams that could benefit from some of these free agents and really these signings that could potentially happen. And a lot of teams could very well acquire the best possible players for their rosters. I want to highlight some of the teams that MLB.com highlighted that would be the best fits for certain teams, and I'll run through whether or not that could really work. So the first team that jumps out to me is Justin Turner potentially landing with the Blue Jays. So they think that the Blue Jays' best free agent pickup would be Justin Turner, and I honestly would totally agree with that. Now, here's the big thing. Justin Turner the likelihood of Justin Turner re-signing with the Dodgers, I feel like is much higher. I think that would probably make a lot more sense just because, A, he's been very successful with them. He's been with them since 2014, and he's just coming off of a World Series win and going to the World Series in 3 of the last 4 years. So right there, that's probably telling me a lot that Justin Turner is not really going to go anywhere. And I know that he's going to be 36, so he is aging a little bit, and he is getting a little bit older. Now, I think what they could potentially think about doing is, at least the Dodgers, that is, and how they could maybe just let Justin Turner walk, and then they could acquire somebody good, so then the Blue Jays could potentially be one to pick him up. I think that if they were to maybe, trade somebody, give somebody up, I know Francisco Lindor has been, his name's been flying around with a lot of different teams, but the one team could be the Dodgers. Obviously, they have the payroll to pay him. And I know that they would have to do something with Corey Seager over at short, so if they could move him to third, maybe move Lindor to third, not quite sure. But at that point, then you say, okay, Justin Turner walks, and now the Blue Jays have an opportunity to bring a veteran who has a great bat in the lineup, and he brings a lot of experience, and he brings winning championship caliber baseball to a city that has not seen a World Series win since 1992 or 1993, whichever year it was. So clearly, I think Justin Turner would work very well, especially with how poor of a year Travis Shaw had this past year. He batted below 260, and with how well Justin Turner batted in the playoffs and in the World Series, it's without question he's going to be a very, very popular person to go after this free agency. And hopefully, for some of these other teams that are trying to go after him and that could really use him, hopefully the Dodgers don't go ahead and try to re-sign him, because if not, it's going to make things a little bit harder for some of these other teams. And I think the Blue Jays getting a third baseman, a solid third baseman, I think that's definitely something to kind of take note of. And I think that's definitely something to that is going to, without question, potentially benefit them in the long run. So I think Justin Turner going to the Blue Jays is a very, very good selection. Now, the next team that I think would be very interesting, that I do agree, but I think it should be a better option, and they say that Gio Gonzalez should wind up with the Orioles. Now, I do like that because they do need pitching, but I don't think they need old veteran pitching that is on its last leg in its career. I don't mean to sound like that about Gio Gonzalez, but he's clearly not the same player that he was back in, the mid-2010s. And I do think, though, that the Orioles are going to need some sort of pitching because they've been one of the worst. This past year they were one of the worst pitching teams in baseball. They had one of the lowest quality start rates in baseball. So they're looking for that pitching, and they know that they've got the hitting. I think the hitting is without question there, and I think they all are aware that they've got pieces to build with for the future. One person in particular is Ryan Mountcastle, and we all know the season that Ryan Mountcastle had, batting over 300 in his rookie year. So I think going after some pitching is definitely ideal for the Orioles. Now, you look at Gio Gonzalez's 2020 stats, and they're not spectacular, right? In 31 2/3 innings, he struck out 34, hit a 4.83 ERA, a 1.86 WHIP. So, you're nearing 2 in your WHIP, and you don't have that many strikeouts as a starting pitcher. I'm not totally sold on that. I don't think that's a great selection. I don't think that would be a great fit. I know that they were, selecting somebody that would be a likely candidate, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to land there. But a guy that hasn't really had, he hasn't had an ERA below 3 since 2017. And that was the last time that he had an ERA that was anywhere below 3. It was 2.96, so just barely under 3. So clearly somebody that I think is not necessarily a great selection to go after. I think that they could definitely go after some other starting pitchers that could potentially have a big time impact for their team, because like I mentioned, the hitting is definitely there, so they don't have to really worry about that. I mean, looking at some of the free agents, Mike Fears is one that I think could definitely fit on that team. I mean, again, he's kind of an older starting pitcher, but I don't think he's I don't think he's on his last leg like Gonzalez is kind of on his last leg. Kevin Gausman, he's another guy. Now, he did sign with the Giants, so he's probably not going to, so he's completely off the board, so, he's not going to be an option. But, I mean, other guys that could potentially, be a good fit, maybe J.A. Happ. I know he's, again, kind of old, but I know that he was fairly reliable this past year, and he actually, I can't remember what the stat was, but his pitching efficiency has been through the roof the last couple years. So, again, another option. And not to mention, Felix Hernandez. Felix Hernandez, I know that would be kind of a stretch for the Orioles, but if they could get him on a one-year deal, that would not be bad. I mean, King Felix has still got something left in the tank. He's with the Braves right now, so we could maybe see somebody like that land on the Orioles, but I do like the idea that MLB.com has with a pitcher going to the Orioles, which I do think is going to work very well for them. Now, the next team that I want to discuss that it's very intriguing that they have, but it makes a lot of sense why they have him there, and that is the Indians going after Jock Peterson. And this is why. This is very interesting, and this is from the MLB.com article. The Indians the Indians outfield ranked last in the AL in home runs, extra base hits, runs scored, and OPS. So clearly they are not a great outfield hitting team. And I think Jock Peterson, sure, he didn't have a great year this year, but he's averaged an 835 OPS the last 3 or 4 years. So he's definitely a power hitter. There's definitely some pop in his bat, and especially as an outfielder, and clearly they need to figure out the outfield hitting, mainly because, I don't know. That's how I kind of look at it, is that I think that the hitting in the outfield definitely needs to be picked up a little bit for this Indians team, especially with how close they are. They're always so close. And not to mention, Peterson brings championship experience. Just like Justin Turner, he's been there. He's done that. He's been at the highest, point of baseball season that you can possibly get to, the World Series. So, and he's been there 3 of the last 4 years, not to mention. So if you're able to bring on somebody like that does have a great bat as well, I totally agree with that. Again, he's not a contact hitter. He's going to be a power guy. He's going to drive in a lot of runs. He's going to give up a lot. He's going to have a lot of home runs. He's not going to bat for a crazy great average. So I just think for the most part, I think that Jock Peterson would go very well, and really any outfielder. I mean, if they wanted to go out and spend money on Michael Brantley, I know they're trying to, watch their dollar, so they might not be able to go after him, but the idea of getting an outfielder that can provide hitting is definitely the direction that they need to go in. Now, the next team that I'm kind of in disagreement with MLB.com, I don't necessarily think that they should go after somebody like this player, and it's Kirby Yates going to the Athletics. Now, I know Liam Hendricks is going to be up for free agency, so that could definitely throw things for a loop a little bit in their bullpen, because he's been one of the best relief guys the last 2 years in baseball. And Kirby Yates did not have a great year this year. I mean, he had over a 12 ERA, and that is, a big time, dip down and drop off from the year before, where I think he was 41 for 44 in 2019 in save opportunities, and he had a below 2 ERA or below 1 ERA. So clearly, Yates has the capabilities, but I don't think the Athletics should go after somebody like that. If they can try and keep Hendricks around for one more year, I would personally add some more hitting. I think what happens is they're hitting. I mean, you see Matt Chapman, you see Matt Olson, you see Marcus Semien, you see all these big-time names, but you don't necessarily see, I feel like, a result. I mean, it goes to a certain point. They always are really good in the regular season, and it doesn't really transpire into the playoffs. So, again, they should go after somebody, maybe like a Justin Turner, somebody that's got some veteran leadership, somebody that has been around the block a couple times, and somebody that could, again, provide consistent, solid hitting. Because there's a couple times where you'll see, Matt Olson hitting below 200. I mean, I know Matt Chapman, all 3 of them were below 250 this year. And I believe, I can't remember if it was Matt Chapman or Matt Olson, but one of them was dead last out of all qualifying batters in batting average in baseball this year. So, and I know that their power numbers speak for themselves, and they've got great power numbers, but just the very low inability to get on base just in general, I think that should also be something that they should look at and definitely try and fix. I mean, not necessarily get rid of those three guys because they are all three very good players, but I mean, looking at some free agents, Edwin Encarnacion, I know he didn't have a great year this year, but he's experienced, he's been around winning teams, and he's a DH, so you can bring him into the AL. I think that would be a very ideal. You know, someone like Todd Frazier. Again, he's been around some winning teams here and there, but he's also old. He's got some experience behind him, and he could provide a very good bat. Now, obviously, you know, you've got, I think it's Matt Olson over at third base. So as a result, you know, Frazier is a third baseman. That's not going to really work, in my opinion. But I do think that just going after experienced hitting as opposed to, you know, really good bullpen pitching, I think that's what the Athletics should really focus on, because I think their pitching is pretty solid across the board. I don't think that it's necessarily, you know, I think that it's not something that they should really pay attention to, not necessarily not pay attention to, but something that they should not necessarily keep as a forefront. I think that they should definitely look at the hitting more so than you know, the pitching. But the pitching definitely, you know, and excuse me, it was actually Matt Chapman that plays third base. So, but regardless, that's going to throw things off. So I think that they should probably go after, you know, again, a veteran hitter as opposed to solid, you know, relief pitching that, again, is coming off a very poor year. So Kirby Yates clearly did not, you know, give himself, I think, a logical or a legitimate argument in trying to sign a very good, lucrative deal. Maybe that's why he's landing on a team like the Athletics. They don't have to pay as much. So the next team that I disagree with, the Nationals. I mean, they think that James Paxton should be there. I don't think so. I mean, you've got plenty of pitching. You have plenty of pitching. Go after some good hitting. Go get some good hitters that aren't old, like Howie Kendrick, you know, or Asdrubal Cabrera. Asdrubal Cabrera is going to be, you know, a free agent this year as well. So at the end of the day, I think that you need to go after some hitting because you do have Soto, you do have Trey Turner, you've got young pieces that you can build around. Both of them had career years this year. Soto led the NL in just about every single hitting statistic. So, and personally, I think he was the biggest MVP snub this year. But again, that's a different conversation for a different day. But anyways, I think that they need to focus on the hitting, and they need to not go after guys that are 35 and older. They need to go after some guys that are, you know, in their low 30s, maybe, you know, later 20s to go after, to really try and bring in. I mean, I know this will probably be an incredibly outlandish thing to throw out there, but somebody like Marcell Ozuna, yeah, he'll be a free agent, and he's had an incredible season. And they've got the payroll to pay somebody. And it would definitely bolster up that outfield. I mean, Adam Eaton is going to be a free agent, so who knows where he will go. And as a result, it's going to definitely open things up in their outfield. So Ozuna, although he did play much better as a DH this year, so if it doesn't go universal, I think that it would definitely hinder his performance a little bit, having to be out in the field. But if not, I think he would be a huge get for them. Because he could, again, if the universal DH was in effect next year, he would be a perfect DH to have. And if you had to throw him in the field, sometimes you could. But he would be a great bat, and he would definitely help with carrying the load that Turner and Soto have been, you know, really given now. So I think that going after a pitcher, it's not a terrible idea, but I would rather them go after some hitting simply because I feel like they've got plenty of pitching with Corbin, Scherzer, and Strasburg. Now, I know Strasburg is, you know, injury-prone, same with Scherzer, and Corbin's kind of hit or miss sometimes. But if those are your top three guys, I would not be complaining. I mean, those are all three legitimate strong arms in baseball today, and I think that they do a phenomenal job. And I think that if they go after some hitting, I think it's going to really round out this team in a much better way. So the final team that I want to get into that I don't really agree with this, mainly because I don't think they've got the money to pay this guy, and it's the Cincinnati Reds. They think that Michael Brantley should wind up with the Reds. Now, I understand that Castellanos and Moustakas both were underperformers this year for the most part. Now, Castellanos did play pretty well for the beginning of the year. I will give him a lot of credit there. But I think at the end of the day, Moustakas was disappointing, without question. And their pitching was great. I mean, they had a top 3 pitching rotation this year. They were second in the league in strikeouts as a team. They were top 10 as a team in ERA. So without question, I think that it's a matter of, you know, can they pay somebody like Michael Brantley? And Michael Brantley, he's been a very good player for the last few years. He's not going to want some cheap contract. He's going to want a lot of money. Now, he is getting into his 30s, so it's another question of how much longer does he have. But I honestly think that if he were to wind up with the Reds, I don't know how that would work. And you don't want to have a similar situation where they had this past season where they went after, you know, 2 guys and they didn't really pan out well for them, and now they're both on 4-year contracts making, you know, over $60 million in total. They don't want to keep, I feel, wasting money on guys that are not going to perform. So I think that, again, Michael Brantley is a very reliable hitter, and he's a very reliable player. But, I mean, you could definitely go after somebody that is not as expensive and could maybe kind of add, a little bit of a push for you offensively. And I don't want to, I think Jed Jerko, maybe, he could be an all right fit for them potentially. I mean, he had a pretty decent year with the Brewers. It wasn't sensational, but as an aging, getting kind of older veteran, I think that he did a very nice job for them. And I think that if you go after somebody like that, then that's where you're going to really have a well-balanced team because they've got the pitching. The pitching is clearly there. So just a couple teams that I kind of agree with, disagree with. Ultimately, the Reds, the Nationals, and the Athletics, I don't agree with MLB.com's decision on that. But I will say I do agree with their, kind of thinking and thought process on the Blue Jays, Orioles, and Indians without question. I think those are all three legitimate, options to have, or at least the idea that they need to go after, with the Blue Jays going after a third baseman that can hit, Orioles going after some pitching, Indians going after an outfielder that can hit. Those all make sense. But the Athletics going after, a relief guy that did not have a very good year. I mean, another guy, if they're going to go after relief, they should maybe go after Mark Melancon. I've always thought that Mark Melancon has been a very underappreciated closer in the game, and I think that he would fit very well on this Athletics team. Plus, you could probably get him for a deal, and you wouldn't have to pay the guy a whole lot of money. And he had a pretty good year this year, way better than Kirby Yates was. And again, I don't agree with the Nationals going after starting pitching because I think they've got plenty of that. And then the Reds going after some hitting that could be costly for them. I think that they should maybe play safe, find somebody that's maybe a little bit of an older veteran that they can go after and really try and add an extra dynamic to this offense that was very disappointing this year, without question. So that'll do for this segment, folks. Thanks again for sticking around, but stay right there. We will be right back after this commercial for the final segment today, where I will include my stadium reviews of the various ballparks that I've been to and how I would grade each stadium I've caught a game at. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we have one less segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you, and in the previous segment I discussed the top free agent signings certain teams could make according to MLB.com and mentioned whether or not I agreed with their selection, and now I want to wrap up today with giving my stadium review of the different stadiums in the league that I've been able to go to and hopefully can either convince you to go to a certain stadium or maybe steer you from going to a certain stadium that might not be all that. I've been to numerous stadiums over the years, and I want to go to every single MLB stadium as a bucket list kind of thing, and I've already marked off 15 of the 30 MLB stadiums. But I want to highlight which ones I would rate as higher-end stadiums and which ones you probably aren't going to be in a big rush to go to. Now, again, this isn't a ranking of the best. I am simply grading them and giving almost a review of the atmosphere, the view of the outfield, accessibility, and other factors, really. And if you couldn't tell, I take a lot of pride in having a solid grading scale for MLB stadiums, mainly because I think that an MLB ballpark there's something special about going and watching baseball in the summertime at an MLB stadium. I don't know quite what it is, but it's just a great feeling being out there, catching some really good action, and being, again, outdoors and at beautiful ballparks and beautiful stadiums. And so I want to get into, which ones I like the most and really the ones that I like the least of all the ones that I've been to. And the first one I've got to say is, without question, probably the best stadium I've ever been to. And if anybody out there has not yet, been to this stadium, they need to go. You need to go see the stadium because it is without a doubt one of the most beautiful stadiums in probably the entire MLB, and that's PNC Park. I mean, I'm giving it an A+ grade without question. They've got a beautiful view of the city. You have, if you're sitting along the third baseline at PNC Park and you've got the entire city backdrop behind you, because they pretty much have, the center field pretty open for the most part. And, I mean, it is just incredible to see. And so I think that they've got great food. I mean, it's always a very warm, welcoming ballpark. You're never going to run into any issues with fans if you're a fan of an opposing team. Pirates fans aren't really like that. They're not going to try and come after you. Very friendly, very welcoming, and very helpful. You know, I mean, a couple times when I first arrived in Pittsburgh, I was a little lost. I didn't know where I was going in the stadium, and I would ask ushers, and they were very, very helpful, very willing to show you around and kind of, you know, point you in the right direction. And I just think that even though the team is not great, I think it should speak volume to the stadium that it's able to really kind of change, you know, your entire perception of that experience. You might not be seeing a great baseball team, but because you're at such a beautiful stadium, it kind of erases that. It kind of, you know, washes that away a little bit, and I think it makes it a little bit better. So I'm definitely going to go with PNC Park as an A-plus grade. And now the next one I want to get into, and this is actually the stadium from where I'm originally from, outside of D.C., and that's the Nationals Park over in Washington, D.C. I'm going to give it a B-. And the reason why I'm doing this is this. It's a nice stadium. I don't think that there's really anything wrong with it, but there's nothing glamorous about it. It's not like you've got a great backdrop of a scenery of a city like you do at PNC Park. It's not like you get a great effect of, you know, being literally downtown. Instead, I feel like I'm kind of, you know, closed off from everything, and all I can see is apartment buildings. And there's a ton of traffic around the stadium. I mean, there is so much traffic. And I know that there's traffic really anywhere you go, you know, during a game, during game day, and kind of after the game and whatever else. But in D.C., it's just a totally different monster. And as a result, you know, it's definitely hard to kind of maneuver around the stadium. You've got the subway there, sure, but the subway always gets really packed. But I think that it's a nice stadium. It's fairly new. You know, it's not that old, but it doesn't have that special feature that you always hear certain stadiums having, whether it's, you know, the waterfall rocks that are out in LA Angels Stadium, or it's the scenery in Pittsburgh, or it's the retractable dome at Miller Park, or it's, you know, the apple that was out in center field for the New York Mets. Whatever it might be, the Nationals Park doesn't really have that feature. It doesn't have that eye-catching, wow, that's going to really stick out to me, and I'm going to really kind of remember that, and it's going to resonate with me, and that's how I'm going to identify Nationals Park, with that kind of symbolage. That doesn't really happen. That's not really a thing at Nationals Park. Again, it's a nice stadium. I'm not going to give it a bad grade, but it's not a great stadium. So I'm going to go with a B- there. Now, the next stadium I want to talk about is Wrigley Field, and I loved Wrigley Field. I'm going to give it an A-, mainly because, again, I'm always about a view, and I just love the PNC Park view you get. But Wrigley Field has its own unique, classic feel to it because of all the history that's been around, all of the monumental games and players that have played there, and just, the history that is with this team that's one of the oldest baseball teams, one of the oldest professional teams in all of North American sports. And you think of kind of identifying features of a stadium that you really remember, and you kind of, you know, if you've never been to the stadium and you go, you say to yourself, wow, that is what I've seen on TV, and now I'm seeing it in real life. And it's the Ivy Wall. I mean, the Ivy Wall out in the outfield is something that, you know, you grow up seeing on SportsCenter or on TV in any sort of capacity. And now if you go to the stadium, you are actually seeing that in person, which I think is a very cool thing. I think it's a very unique thing. And, I mean, there's no other stadium in baseball that has an ivy-covered outfield wall. That is not a thing. So I think that, you know, it's a great stadium to go catch a game at. I think the fans, you know, they're very passionate. There's a lot of life that's going on around the stadium. I mean, there's always, you know, restaurants that are open, bars that are open, stores that are open, whatever it might be. You definitely feel like you are at a classic MLB stadium. You don't feel like you're at some sort of brand new stadium, brand new ballpark with all sorts of new features and this, that, and the other. You're at just an old-fashioned stadium that you really can't go wrong with. So I'm going to give it an A-, definitely way better than Nationals Park, but I don't think it's as good as PNC Park. And then the next one I want to talk about is Fenway Park, another historic, classical stadium that's been around for years, part of a team that's been around for years. And similar to how Wrigley Field has the Ivy Wall in the outfield, Fenway Park has the Green Monster. I mean, how much more iconic can you get as a stadium feature as the Green Monster? It's literally one of the most, I mean, it probably is, if there was a 7 wonders of the world in sports, it would definitely be one of those, without question. I mean, it's one of the most, again, it's a feature that sticks out no matter if you're a fan or if you're not, even if you watch baseball casually or in a very serious manner, no matter what, you're most likely, if you know baseball and if you know the Red Sox, you're going to hear about the Green Monster. It's a very, very historical thing, and I think that's what's so cool about it. And not to mention, again, it's very similar to Wrigley Field. They both have very similar feels outside of the stadium. You know that you're it's almost like you're in a time portal, and you're walking back in time. And, I mean, it does not, again, not a crazy new renovated stadium. Doesn't have, I mean, you have also pesky pole, the very short outfield walls. There's a lot of things. I mean, I'm thinking about Fenway Park right now, and I have a perfect image of it in my head because of all the years that I saw it on TV and then actually going and experiencing that and saying, wow, this is actually, I'm seeing this in real life. And seeing a Red Sox game during the playoffs is by far one of the most incredible sports atmospheres you'll ever come across in all of sports. I don't care if it's basketball, baseball, football, hockey, soccer, tennis, lacrosse, whatever. Being at Fenway Park at a Red Sox game for the playoffs, it is one of the most idyllic things that you can come across as a sports fan and catching a game. So I'm going to give Fenway Park an A because I'm just a ginormous fan of Fenway Park. Now, getting into my last 3 stadiums that I've been to, and this one I'm not a huge fan of. It was Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati. I'm probably going to give it a C-, if not a D+. And this is why. Very similar to how the Nationals Park was, it was just super plain. It was very boring, and it wasn't even a new renovated stadium. So it wasn't like Nationals Park where, okay, everything is new, everything is nice, everything is, Great American Ballpark just kind of looked like the most average-looking stadium, just an average-looking, and it didn't have, and I think it kind of, they don't do it, I think, justice, really, because they've got also a great view of the river, similar to how Pittsburgh is. And I think that if they were to renovate the stadium and they were to kind of give that view of the river that you can get in PNC Park, I think that's definitely going to just shoot that grade up all the way through the roof. Because, I mean, it wasn't a gross stadium, it wasn't a bad stadium, but it wasn't a great stadium. It was a very average, below average stadium that I felt was just kind of subpar. And I remember I went to go see a Reds-Rockies game. I was on a baseball stadium road trip with my parents a couple years, long time ago. And it was one of the stops that we made, and I remember kind of walking away from the game saying I was not really impressed with that stadium. That stadium didn't really strike me as anything special. Maybe it was because the Reds were not very good and the game was kind of boring. I just wasn't really interested in it. But I don't think that it's kind of a stadium that people are going to say, hey, I can't wait to go see a game at Great American. I think it's a great ballpark. I kind of have a different feeling on it, so I'm going to give it a C-, D+ area. But ultimately, again, these are just my ratings. Somebody out there might disagree and say, hey, that's a really nice ballpark, and I might be wrong. But that's just how I kind of personally viewed it. And again, I haven't been there in many years, so probably not the greatest gauge on it. But, if I were to go back, I could definitely give a little bit better of kind of an analysis, if you will, of the stadium. So my last 2, I've got to say Rogers Center in Toronto, I'm giving it a C-. Again, very lackluster. I kind of felt like I was in a warehouse almost. I mean, you've got the dome, and then it's just kind of like white metallic walls that just surround the entire... You just feel like you're inside of an overly sized warehouse in a huge factory or a massive, package, headquarters or something like that where you're, or some sort of big shipping yard. I mean, it's nothing very special. It's, again, probably better than Great American because you do identify with the dome and kind of what Rogers Center is. But I wouldn't say that it's a stadium that is light years ahead of other stadiums. I think it's a very, again, dull stadium. It kind of reminds me of Tropicana Field. I've been to Tropicana Field, and Rogers Center and Tropicana give me very similar kind of feels to it, if you will. They're both inside, they're domed stadiums, and they just don't really have kind of a, inviting feel, if you will, to being, inside of a stadium and being at a ballpark. I feel like I'm kind of inside of a bubble, and I don't really like that. I'd rather know that I'm outside, and being outside with playing baseball, you kind of associate those two things. Now, I've been to Miller Park, and Miller Park does have a retractable dome, and I've been at a game where they had the dome open, and then a game where they didn't have the dome open. So I think that's a cooler aspect, is having that retractable dome, having that option to open it or close it. I believe the Mariners Stadium also has that. I could be wrong. I have a buddy of mine, actually, that went to a Mariners game out in Seattle. He said it was incredible. He said it was really, really nice. I think it's T-Mobile Park now, if I'm not mistaken. It used to be Safeco Field. I could be wrong on that. They might have changed the name. I can't quite remember. But I like the retractable dome idea. Rogers Center just doesn't have that. They've got just, again, kind of, I feel like I'm in a big old indoor tennis bubble, if you will, catching a baseball game. I'm not a big fan of it. So I'm going to give it a C-, but then the last one that I'm also going to give an A+ to, which I think rivals PNC Park. It's the only other one that I've been to that I personally think rivals it, and that's Oracle Park, where the San Francisco Giants play. I caught a game there many years ago. But, I mean, and I don't know if it's because we sat pretty high up, but you could see the entire river, and the ocean. You don't even see the river. You see an ocean. And that's what's so cool about it. It's just you're at a baseball game, and then all of a sudden it's the Pacific Ocean. You're on the furthest side of our country catching a baseball game. It's a pretty unreal feeling. And I remember when I went to go see, I think they were having some sort of, Monster Energy kind of BMX exhibit or some sort of event, or I don't know what it was, but they were actually on a massive shipping boat or a massive, some sort of huge vessel out in the water, and they were performing, tricks. They were having a competition. So it was really cool. I mean, San Francisco's a great city, but catching a ball game there is awesome. You've got all the cool stadiums outside. And again, it's very similar to PNC Park. You've got a great view of the water. You've got a great view of kind of just the city, and you really feel like you're in a city, but you're also catching a baseball game. So it's the best of both worlds, I think. I'm a huge fan of Oracle Park. A couple other ones that I've always been a big fan of. Again, very, very big fan of Miller Park. I don't know if there's just some bias in me because I'm a big Brewers fan. Camden Yards is another classic one. If anybody out there has not been to Camden Yards, whenever we can go back to baseball games, I would highly suggest going to Baltimore and catching a Orioles game at Camden Yards. Very similar to Fenway and Wrigley, you've got the old warehouse out in right field that a lot of people, at least I do, associate Camden Yards with, which I think is very cool. I mean, I remember growing up not having a baseball team in D.C., so, my family and I, we would always go see Orioles games. And it was always a great time going and seeing a game at Camden Yards. Again, a very historic stadium. But ultimately, I think there's a lot of great stadiums out there. I know that I've got a lot that I want to check off my bucket list. And I know that as time goes on, I'll definitely try and continue to, cross those off. And whenever we can get back to a game, because ideally I would like to be able to go to a game next summer. I don't know if that's going to happen, but if that does happen, I'll be sure to try and go to some new stadiums, give some new stadium reviews, and share my thoughts and my experience with that with all of you tuning in and listening. So that'll wrap it up for us here today. Thank you again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review that really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening today, and as always, have a fantastic day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.